Frank Wagner. He's here. He's in the house. He's running for governor. Frank, thanks for being here.
Morning, John. How you doing?
Good. I want to thank your videographer. What's his name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy's coming in here and doing videography. But Jeremy was a lifesaver because we came in today, and until it was too late, Michael and I found out that we were out of coffee. Not a good thing here at 5:30 a.m. So things weren't going well, and then Jeremy showed up, and he went to the 7-Eleven, and he got us a large black coffee. So now we're in a much better mood. So we want to thank Jeremy for that. Okay, tell us about your gubernatorial campaign. You're in second or third place. Look, Frank, let's just cut to the chase here. The Gillespie campaign is hitting on all cylinders. They're way ahead. They raised a ton of money. I mean, you know and I know they're going to drop, or I know, they're going to drop $2 million in the final 3 to 4 weeks on TV to get their name ID up and to expand their lead. I mean, how do you compete with this guy?
Well, first of all, let's take a few little bit of history lessons here, John. David Bratt outspent probably 20-1 by
25-1.
25-1 by Eric Cantor.
Yes.
And we now have Congressman David Bratt. I know in our region of the state down here, Scott Taylor was outspent more than 10-1 by Randy Forbes. Had all the endorsements, had everything going for him, and got shellacked. So endorsements.
By the way, we predicted both of those upsets, right, as you know.
Right. Endorsements and money, while important, have lost their importance, I believe, quite a bit in terms of campaigning. Again, I think Gillespie's support's been a mile wide and about 1/10 of an inch deep. And as they find out, there's alternative. Frank Wagner, somebody with the experience, somebody who's actually a military veteran, someone who knows what's going on, and all three candidates, interestingly enough, and if Denver gets in, he does have a business and that type of thing. But I've listened to Corey Stewart. I'm a businessman. Well, you're a lawyer, and you practice independent, and I guess that's a businessman. And then Ed Gillespie, I'm a businessman. Well, you're a lobbyist. Tell it like it is. You can call it communications, whatever, but you're a lobbyist. And you think, you presume that because you anointed the altar up in Washington, D.C., that somehow you can come down and run Virginia and you can do a better job than anybody else. I mean, that's ridiculous. Think about that. I mean, we have a governor that doing that right now, and look at the results. Mm-hmm. He's been doing nothing but gadflying around the world, supposedly attracting businesses and doing that type of thing. But, he came into this legislative session with absolutely no agenda. I've never seen anything like it, and I've been up there 25 years. I've never seen anything like it. Give me a good original idea that's come out of Washington, D.C., where Ed Gillespie comes from. Think about that. You can't think of a good idea that's coming there. As people find out there's an alternative, as people find out that, hey, here's someone with the experience, here's someone talking about issues that are important to us, the career technical education. Let's look at our 6th grade through 12th grade and look at 2 distinct directions for students. They can choose the SOL route, if you will, liberal arts method of going, and they can look at career technical education, right, and look where the jobs are. Let's start making some dramatic changes in how we look at Virginia, with the sole purpose of increasing economic activity in Virginia. And when we start to look at those types of things, you start to say, hey, wait a minute. There's a plan out there. There's a real plan out there. This is not a polished speech, polled out very well, delivered very quickly, and says all the right things. But when you listen to it, you say, what's he actually going to do? Mm-hmm. And when you listen and you look at the website and you look at the things that we're talking about in the campaign, these are real issues confronting Virginians. When you look at access for Virginians to our own colleges, a huge issue. Virginians, the governor doesn't own the universities. I don't own the university. General Assembly doesn't own the university. The citizens of Virginia own these universities. They're the ones that pay the taxes to support our state colleges and universities. Their children should have first priority in entering our state colleges and universities. It only makes sense. And let's look at the costs. The costs of our colleges and universities have skyrocketed. They've even outpaced the cost of medical care.
Well, look, you're a veteran, Frank Wagner, right? You served in the Navy, right? You're a deep sea diver, so you know what's going on. So today, 2 district court judges, one last night in Hawaii, one today in Maryland, shoot down Trump's travel ban, President Trump's travel ban, saying that it was unconstitutional on religious freedom grounds. So we're now granting constitutional rights to foreigners. What did you make of this whole thing?
Well, I just think you have liberal judges who have been appointed over the years by Democrats, and it's not surprising that they bring their politics to bear when they make their decisions. Obviously, they'll be appealed, and one would hope all the way to the Supreme Court. But you have this factor that people today can file lawsuits, and you have a series of 8 years of Obama selecting very liberal judges who now sit on the benches, and you have a lot of judges held over from the 8 years of the Clinton years sitting on the benches today, that their politics rule their decisions, and you see that kind of over and over and over again, and I think it's important that this goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and if necessary, Congress acts, because protecting our borders and protecting the American people is the top job of the president.
Right.
And the courts are trying to restrict the ability of the president to do his job to protect the American people, and I think that's absolutely imperative.
All right, we're going to open the phone lines up. If you have a question for Republican Senator from Virginia Beach, Frank Wagner, he's a candidate for governor. This is a 4-person race in the Republican primary. This will be decided on June 13th. 4 other candidates in: the frontrunner Ed Gillespie, businessman Denver Riggleman, former chairman of Prince William County Supervisors Corey Stewart, and of course Frank Wagner. Phone lines open. The acspecialist.net truth line just for you if you want to engage Frank Wagner for governor or ask him a question. 888-480-JOHN, 888-480-5646, and the state senator here willing to take your calls. No screening, just be professional. That's all we ask. Let's go to Colonel Mike in Northern Virginia. Colonel Mike, you're on the air.
Show, Frank. How are you?
I'm doing great, Colonel. How you doing?
Great. Listen, Frank, I just heard you speaking about the schools. I love what you said. That's fantastic. Our issue with the public schools, the universities that are paid by the taxpayers in Virginia is, also another trick to this is the foreign students and the amount of money that's given in the way of scholarship. And then they offset this with the out-of-state students by having kids come in from out-of-state and pay more money. But the main issue, Frank, is the tenured professors. These costs they keep talking about going up, and the loans and the amount of loans are almost into the trillion. But nobody loses any salaries. Nobody takes the haircut. That's one issue. The second issue is if you're going to create more jobs, you make the environment to create more jobs, because government don't create jobs. Private sector does, but you create the environment. When you create the environment, it's almost virtually impossible. You have I think within Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland area, 2/3 of the country's population's within a day's drive. But it's almost virtually impossible to get through with 95, especially in the summertime. I have family come down to visit Virginia. They pull their hair out. 4 hours on the Beltway is just uncalled for. So it's roads and education. And I'll take this off the air. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you'll visit my website, because what you're going to talk about when you read my website is roads and education. I'm the only candidate, and John knows this, I believe it on either side of the aisle, that's talked about, put bills in for additional transportation funding, carried one this year, got it out of the Senate. Unfortunately, it died in the House of Delegates. But we have got to make a further investment in transportation. It's interesting. The gas taxes in North Carolina are 3 times what we pay in Virginia. 3 times the state gas tax rate is 3 times, yet the retail price of gasoline is virtually identical to the cost it is in Virginia.
And who's got better roads?
Well, North Carolina.
No question.
North Carolina is planning an interstate highway parallel to Route 58 in Southside Virginia, right? And then come up through Chesapeake and tie into the port. They want access to the port of Virginia.
Right.
That's a huge economic driver that we haven't taken advantage of.
Well, they figured it out.
Where do you think all the economic activity is going to be? The economic activity will be along that interstate highway in North Carolina, because they have the money to build it.
Right.
If we had the money to build it, we could turn Route 58 into I-58 along parallel the North Carolina border all the way out in Danville
all
and
the
beyond,
way to Danville.
all the way to Danville. That could be the manufacturing corridor. It used to be textiles and furniture. Right now, all we're doing in Richmond is patching the symptoms of Southside Virginia. We are throwing more money. We have social programs, and we're throwing more money to make up the difference in education because we're not after the disease. The disease is they lost their manufacturing base. So let's get the manufacturing base back. Let's bring in broadband Virginia. Specifically, Colonel, what I did this session was carry a bill that put the floors back into place, and it's kind of a little bit difficult, but floors for Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia because we need more money, and we need to go the extra mile in these two regions because of the traffic problems that we have. And it passed 2 years ago. It passed this year in the Senate and failed to pass the House of Delegates. I will tell every listener here, because if you believe today that our transportation system is adequate for the economy today, then you're not going to like what I say. But if you believe our transportation system's inadequate for the economy we have today, then how can any candidate talk about growing the economy and diversifying the economy without talking about a bigger investment in transportation? It cannot be done. And that's the engineer in me talking. And that's what I'm talking about, John. You ask, how are you going to beat Ed Gillespie? We're going to get that word out because I'm talking about real solutions, addressing real things to real problems, and as the Colonel said, creating that environment to let jobs grow. We have an education system that's not turning out the qualified students to fill the jobs today, not to mention the jobs that will be available tomorrow.
Right, Frank.
Fix that. Let's make a bigger investment in transportation. Let's cut back the regulations. Let's start issuing permits, and let's get out of the way and watch out what happens all across Virginia.
But the political analysts are telling me, look, Frank Wagner is proposing a tax increase. You cannot win a Republican primary in Virginia proposing higher taxes. I mean, that's what they're telling me.
Well, John, you know, I went to the Naval Academy, okay? I don't know anything other than to be 100% honest with people. I do not know it. I'm not going to sit out here, and I never have in the 25 years, and just remember, I've gone 10-0 in elections, okay? So by just being straightforward and honest with people. I think the problem we have in politics today is people aren't willing to say what really needs to be done to fix the problems. And maybe that makes me unique, and that's okay. I can live with that. But ultimately, I got to go to bed with myself at night, and I got to sleep. And I cannot go to bed and sit there and say, you know, I'm proposing things that can't be done. I've listened to Corey Stewart. I listened to Ed Gillespie. Sit there and propose things that I know are either unworkable, can't be done, or is beyond the art of what can be done in Richmond. And that either comes from lack of experience or I'll do anything and say anything to get elected. You know, it's not Frank Wagner. Frank Wagner will lay out a plan for you, a business plan, and say, if we do these things, then these will be the results. And ultimately, you know what? We're going to end up with more money. We're going to end up with more money in Richmond, not by raising general fund taxes, but by making strategic investments in transportation, making strategic investments in our education system, and reap the dividends of job growth, job creation, higher paid jobs throughout Virginia, and the revenues will come in. And then we'll be able to address a number of other things. But that's a totally different tack, John. And you know what? I think when I talk to people, they get it, they understand. I was up in Loudoun County, and I was sitting there with a Republican County Committee,
right,
and fielded questions just
Loudoun
like I'm
County.
doing right now,
right.
And said, you voted for Bob McDonnell's $6 billion tax increase. I'm going, well, that's okay. Okay, he looked at the 6-year plan. It was $1 billion. Fuel taxes for transportation.
The 2013
bill. And I said, you darn right I did. And I said, here's what happens. When you don't want to pay for the roads today, then you have two choices. Either don't build them, or let's go ahead and build it and toll it, which is the ridiculous thing. Now, in Loudoun County, they pay a massive amount of tolls just to try to go to Loudoun County to D.C.
It's unbelievable.
You have the toll road out of Loudoun.
It's $6.
And then you have
go 2 miles at $6.
There you go. And what I'm talking about is the not stepping forward and paying for the road as it should be. They're going to be paying $2 for $1 worth of road construction.
Over that. I mean, if you look at the tunnels that we have, I mean,
Right.
it ends up being 8 or 10 times what the actual cost is. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with State Senator, Republican Virginia Beach, Frank Wagner, running for governor on the Republican side. June 13th primary. There are 4 candidates. You're going to have to vote and make up your mind. Frank Wagner, Ed Gillespie, Denver Riggleman, Corey Stewart. One of those candidates is going to win. It's not a plurality. It's a majority. That means technically somebody can win with 25.1% of the vote. Technically, that could happen, 823. If you want to speak to Senator Wagner or ask him a question or otherwise engage, here's what you do. 888-480-JOHN, 888-480-JOHN, the acspecialist.net truth line, 888-480-5646. Or if you're shy and you don't want to get on the phone, then I understand that. You can text me. Okay, this is a text here we just got from Joe in Loudoun County. Good morning, John. Can you ask Mr. Wagner to give his views on Go Virginia?
Go Virginia is being proposed by it's business community driven as well as General Assembly look at. Our Virginia Economic Development Partnership is fraught with issues, fraught with problems. It's going through a JLARC study that basically pointed out a number of initiatives. Go Virginia, and anytime you start talking about economic development, I can understand many concerns of folks. There's winners, there's losers, there's, was it the favorite of the governor that got the money? Was it this, that, the other thing? Go Virginia is designed to do away with the favoritism by a board. It's also designed to try to bring regions together on a regional economic development plan as opposed to individual picking winners and losers and doing that. And let me give you some examples, okay? There's been a very big push for a bioscience research corridor. And actually, it's kind of become the Golden Crescent. It includes Inova up in Northern Virginia, MCV down here, Centera, and that type of thing, but also trying to bring some pharmaceutical companies in to develop a synergism of bioscience research in Virginia that's not currently here.
Right.
And it's a coordinated plan, and while Go Virginia is still formulating at this point. So I think it's too early to either grade it, score it, or see if it's going to accomplish the goals it's done, because they're really literally pulling it together right now. It has funding this year. Clearly what we've done in the past is not working. This is an attempt to say, okay, let's try a unique, different approach and see if it works. If it doesn't, if it fails to deliver on what it says, it should be done away with. If it actually achieves what it's looking for, it probably ought to be replicated. And it's going to be statewide. The implications of Go Virginia, but it ought to be further intensified. And that's a big problem with government, is that we don't do away with programs that don't work, and those programs that do work, we don't expand them fast enough. So I mean, Go Virginia, the jury's still out, but I've been supportive of the program. I think it offers a unique opportunity in a number of areas: unmanned systems, small satellites. There's a series of things around that impact regions.
All right, let's get to Chris in Chesterfield. Chris, you're on the air.
Hey, John. Hey, Mr. Wagner, how are you?
Good, Chris. How you doing this morning?
I'm all right. Hey, man, I'm one of these Northern Virginians who moved to Central Virginia, and about 9 years ago. So, for me, it was amazing to see certain differences in how things were done. And I don't mean it was negative every time. I just mean it was different. Now, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is this. My wife works in Richmond. One of the things we were amazed by, I live in Chesterfield. I was amazed at the lack of public transportation. So I investigated it and kind of, figure out what's going on here, because if you can't take a train or a bus during rush hour from Chesterfield into the city routinely, then how are you gonna grow? How's your city gonna prosper? Because I'm from the metropolitan area, so I couldn't get my head around it. I understand there are certain demographic concerns and things like that sort of hamper these things, but I guess I'm just asking you the question: how can Central Virginia, how can Richmond ever develop if people from the surrounding counties, you don't have a reliable public transportation system?
Let me just say this, and I think first and foremost that you need to understand how public transit is funded. It's a combination of state input, the localities, the counties and cities involved in the region, and also the fare box collections. And those three are and along with some federal money, those are the inputs into a regional transportation system, public transportation system. And then beyond that, we give broad latitude to the board for that regional transportation system, because we don't have a cookie cutter approach, certainly in the General Assembly, to to best address the regional transportation problems. And the leadership that's picked, generally speaking, they're picked by the city council members or the county board of supervisors provide those members. As far as the state input, and we're talking about state and governor's race here, the public transportation systems in Virginia get a direct proportion of all transportation fund revenues collected. It's a fixed percentage. I believe it's right around 17%, 16% of all money collected for transportation goes back and then is allocated to these regional transportation systems, and then let the region decide how best to pay for it. It's very difficult for me to go in and understand what's going on in Chesterfield County without knowing what the inputs are from the counties along with that. But Richmond gets their fair proportion of the pie, and connectivity is going to be a big issue. And we can't continue to build out roads. We're going to need some other forms of providing.
One right off the bat, Ryan Care, if it were to pass, and I'm opposed to it because I don't think it solves any of the problems of Obamacare, in my judgment. So I hope it doesn't get out of the House. But if it does and it passes and the governor and the president signs it, Virginia gets hammered, right? Because we go to a block grant system for Medicaid. We didn't get the Medicaid money on the front end. We're not getting on the back end. Then we go to a block grant. It's going to cost the state more money, the Commonwealth more money. What's the deal?
Well, first of all, I hope that Congress takes another look at it, because it was the red states primarily that chose not to expand Medicaid. And you look at that, and there's a lot of red state congressmen that hopefully, and I have passed the message on to my congressmen, that look, if you're going to move forward with this, recognize those states that chose not to expand Medicaid and hold them harmless for their decision not. If you choose to move forward with this bill.
Wait. Say that again.
Hold Virginia harmless, because, and it's a lot of red states chose not to expand Medicaid.
Right.
And we fought that fight for a long time.
3 years.
3 years up in Richmond, since Obamacare passed.
And now we look like idiots, right? I mean,
I don't think we look like idiots. I think we made the smart move. When you look at some of the states that expanded Medicaid and you look at the financial problems those states have, understand that Medicaid is the Pac-Man of our state budget right now. It's gone from 8% to well over 20% of the entire state budget. Those discretionary dollars we have goes right to Medicaid, because it's a federally mandated program that does that. We chose not to expand it because we would have picked up 50%. We pick up half the cost of Medicaid. So if we had chose to expand it, even though the federal government is part of that, said, look, we'll pick up 90%, 90%, and that kind of thing. But it starts to shrink after that. And so it was not a good move on the part of Virginia. States that did that experienced severe financial problems. And while Virginia's gone through a $1.2 billion deficit that we closed up this last session without any tax increases or any fee increases, the problem would have been even larger than the $1.2 billion. Now, for Congress to come in and say, look, you didn't expand, so therefore we're just going to keep the same amount of money going to you that we did before. And the scary thing about block grant, they have to do, if they're going to do a block grant, hold those states that didn't expand harmless. And that means either expand the pie, assuming you have the money to do that, which, at some point in time they're going to need to address the deficit and those things. Either expand it like we had expanded Medicaid, so you hold us on parity with every other state, or cut every other state that did expand Medicaid back to what they were getting prior to the expansion. One of the two. I would recommend the latter of that, because they have huge budget problems in D.C. right now.
So hold Virginia harmless.
Hold Virginia harmless.
Because right now, what has upset me and why I reversed my position on Medicaid expansion after battling it for 36 months and fighting the good fight and all the good stuff is because the exact opposite has happened. We are getting punished for our fiscal responsibility and austerity, while those Republican governors and states that went along with Medicaid expansion and increased the availability of care to their citizens and took the federal money on the front end, they're getting protected in perpetuity, and we're getting actually screwed because we didn't get the money on the front end. We didn't get the money on the back end. They're going to fund it in perpetuity, and now we're getting a block grant, so we actually lose more money. I mean, how does this work?
Well, and that's the problem.
If Ryan Care passes.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the problems. Certainly, the representatives from the red states, and we understand we're not the only state that didn't do that. There were well over 20 states that did not choose to expand Medicaid.
Right. And
they're all primarily red states. Virginia, probably the purple of the red crowd that chose not to. But we have a fiscal responsibility in Richmond to be conservative, and that's conservative leadership at work. To be, if you will, punished for the remaining time that Medicaid's in place, that Virginia gets this lower allotment because we chose not to do that, is obviously wrong, and I think unfairly punishes it and probably opens it up to a lawsuit, which is what the world doesn't need. I think Congress needs to go back and choose a direction to either hold harmless those states that chose not to expand Medicaid. And there's really have one of two options: either roll those states back to their original allocation of money they used to get, or raise up those states that chose not to up to the level had they chosen to raise it, and then go ahead and block grant back to the states. Mm-hmm. But I want to focus on another issue since you brought that up. The key to block granting is block grant but remove the rules. Okay, it's the rules that set up the system that make it wrong. Okay, and we can deliver better services cheaper doing it a Virginia way than by following this cookie-cutter approach mandated out of Washington, D.C. So if they choose to go down the road of block grant, choose to go down to block grant, but let the states have the flexibility to run the programs the way they best see fit to bring the biggest bang for the dollar, for the taxpayer dollar. And I point to a number of innovations that I see going on in the private sector that can be replicated very easy. And let's look at Newport News Shipbuilding, and several companies around Virginia are doing this. They've contracted, they have their own clinic right outside the gates of Newport News Shipbuilding.
That's right.
And their employees can walk right across the street and be right back at work. Or if they're sick, they walk.
Doctors there and everything.
There are doctors there. 80% of all health care, and it's open to their families, 80% of all their health care costs are taken care of by the clinic. No paperwork. And if you look at some of the drivers in healthcare,
they just show their ID.
They just show their ID, and their families have an ID. They get all that taken care of, and then they carry an umbrella policy for the diabetes and heart surgery and the things that would normally be done in a hospital. If we took that pattern of a program that we know works, provides better service to the customer, and saves all kinds of money for the company,
right,
and we flip that, we know where there's high pockets of Medicaid recipients, and chose to replicate that program in those places where there's high populations of Medicaid, we can cut out all the paperwork, cut out all the BS associated with the paperwork and all that. You go out and buy your prescription pharmaceuticals at a discount rate because you're buying in volume for these places. Set them up and let them run, and we'll save the taxpayer money. But that's the kind of Washington does this. We can craft a Virginia way that'll save the taxpayers money and do this. And I'll tell you something else that happens. If you make over a certain income threshold, you lose your Medicaid. So we've created this system. We haven't, but Washington's created this system where I think a welfare recipient with all the benefits is making something like $42,000 a year equivalent.
Yeah, if it's maxed out.
Right. If they start to earn income, they lose it.
Right.
So what incentive do they have to better themselves?
Right.
None whatsoever. The system's got to be redesigned so that people want to improve themselves.
Well, on that you're right.
And start down the road.
On that, Senator, you're right, because when Medicaid first came into play and it started to take care of able-bodied people, now because Medicaid is split with those that are disabled, that have long-term disabled, and those that can't care for themselves. But then when it came into play to accept able-bodied people, it was kind of like unemployment insurance. It's like, here's a bridge until you get a better job or you get financial status, and then you can go buy your own insurance. But what's happened is, like you say, many people stay on it because one of the problems in getting off it and getting a job with a small company is they don't offer insurance, and so they don't want to give up the Medicaid expansion, so they keep earning under the certain amount. So that's one of the big flaws in the system. I want to get back to this whole Medicaid expansion argument, Ryan Care and everything else, and just stay with that a second. Looking back on the whole thing, when this first went down, do you think Republicans did the right thing in resisting Medicaid expansion? When you look at what is going to happen now, those states that took the money are going to get funded. We aren't. If you could do it over again, would you have done the same thing?
Absolutely. And look, there's core conservative values that I share as a conservative. And the core conservative values are we don't expand these huge government programs. Read the Republican Creed. We believe that self-reliance and making better of yourself is the right path to go, rather than creating government reliance. By expanding Medicaid, you're just expanding the pool that's relying on government rather than relying on themselves and moving a capitalist economy forward in the way it should. And I believe that. I still believe that. The entitlement programs that have been put in place in Washington, D.C. are driving the budget and creating now going to be what's going to be a $20 trillion $20 trillion in loans that someday have to be repaid. Mm-hmm. And the government's borrowed $20 trillion. We're $20 trillion in the hole, and it's got to be repaid. And it's going to be our children and grandchildren that will suffer the punishment for making irresponsible decisions. It can be turned, but you have to look at the entitlement programs, and you have to start to taper them back and turn the ship around. So I've always felt, and continue to feel that expanding an entitlement program here in Virginia, knowing that the existing entitlement program that's already in place is the Pac-Man of the state budget.
Right.
It's grown from 8% of our general fund dollars to well over 20% of our general fund dollars. And you say, let's expand it. Let's add another 400,000 Virginians into that pool and then watch what happens. I mean, it's going to eat the entire budget up. And remember, that's the budget that pays for prisons. That's the budget that pays for the education system that provides funding for public education around the state.
Right. Over
half the dollars that we raise in that budget goes directly back to localities. And it gets swallowed up and swallowed up and swallowed up by this ever-expanding Medicaid program. And the government's asking us to basically almost double the size of the pool. And the history of the federal government was originally when the Medicaid program came into place, feds would pick up 60%, 66, two-thirds. State would pick up one-third. Well, all of a sudden, the federal government said, boy, we can't afford that. And state, you pick up half. You pick up half, and it went to 50-50, right?
Right, so the fear is whatever they say, it's going to be something less. Okay, we got about 7 minutes with we're with State Senator Republican Frank Wagner running for governor, Republican primary June 13th. 3 other candidates on the ballot, Denver Riggleman, Corey Stewart, Ed Gillespie. You want to ask him a question or make a comment? Frank Wagner is live with us. You can do that. 888-480-JOHN, 888-480-5646. Or if you want to text me a question, 757-692-1710, 888-480-5646. Okay, so Senator, you've served in the state Senate now for, 3 terms, right?
Since 2000.
Right. So you've been there.
I did a partial on the first term when
right. So you've been there since 2000. So one of your criticisms is, while you've been there since 2000, why is only one Senate Republican colleague out of the other 20 backing your candidacy for governor?
Well, actually, there's more than that, okay? And I'll tell you quite frankly.
But the only one that we have on the record is Senator Stanley.
Well, there's Richard Stewart, too. And
Stewart?
Yeah. And there are others that are tacitly sitting on their hand, and I'll tell you why.
Why are they sitting on their hands?
Well, let me just tell you, John. If you give me a break here, I'll explain it to you. Remember what happened just 2 years ago when I was running for Senate, right? Ed Gillespie was running around getting people to endorse him, and he wasn't a candidate. I mean, he was a candidate. He was out running basically from the day he lost the U.S. Senate race. He's been out securing endorsements all around the state. I was running, and they were spending $2 million trying to get me out of a state Senate seat, the Democrats. You remember that campaign?
I remember well.
I covered it. That's no time to go out and A, announce you're running for governor, and B, ask for people's endorsements while they're spending $2.2 million trying to get you out of office when the direction of the Senate was at stake. Had I lost that race...
And ran $2 million in negative ads.
And $2 million in negative ads on me. In the district I represent, Barack Obama won both times, so they saw an opportunity to knock off a Republican, take control of the Senate, which was what was in the balance, and do that. That's not the time you go out and ask your fellow colleagues to say, will you endorse me for governor, while I'm running a Senate race. And that's what Ed was doing. So I don't ask people to change their word afterwards, okay? He locked all those endorsements up while I was still running for Senate, okay? So that explains it. Now, people give their word to somebody, they're going to keep their word. And once again, if endorsements meant anything, there wouldn't be a Congressman Bratt, there wouldn't be a Congressman Taylor, and there certainly wouldn't be a President Trump if endorsements meant anything. You just got done with Tom Piorello, and every Democrat, every elected Democrat,
everyone,
governor, right on down, has endorsed Ralph Northam.
Everyone
has endorsed Ralph Northam.
Can't find anybody that's backed Piorello.
Endorsements are not what they mean to be.
Piorello is going to win anyway.
Well, you make your predictions. Who knows? But I will say this, and certainly Ralph Northam will probably outfund significantly Tom Piorello.
2-1.
2-1. Okay.
3-1.
Whatever.
Big.
Big. Anyway. And the results will be there. And so you ask, how do you overcome an onslaught? Look, I'm talking about real issues and I'm talking about real solutions here in this campaign. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what I know needs to be fixed in Virginia to get this economy moving again. I know it because I ran real businesses, literally hundreds of employees, hundreds of Virginians I've hired. And these are pipe fitters, ship fitters, welders, the people that make Virginia run. That's who I've worked around
craftsmen
all my life.
Tradesmen.
These are the people that make Virginia run. These are the people that are going to rebuild Virginia a second time. And let me tell you something else. There's not enough of them. There are just not enough trade skillsmen around to support the economy we have today.
Right. We need
much less
more,
an expanded economy.
I mean, your whole technical school thing. I'm 100% with that. That's the direction we need to be heading, and we have to make it legitimate.
Where are you with the transportation? Are you with me on the transportation?
Look, Frank, I'm not shy about this stuff, and everybody knows I was a champion for the great transportation compromise of 2013, led by Bob McDonnell and Speaker Howell. And, the only disappointment I had in 2013 is Republicans were not totally honest, because it was only a down payment on what we needed, and it was sold as a panacea. I mean, the transportation funds have been neglected in the state for 4 decades, and so we were so much in the hole. I think it should have been sold as there's got to be a number of these, but I'm in favor of a floor in the gasoline tax. Absolutely in favor of your position on that, because you need to build roads. And as you said, you've only got 3 choices. You either increase funding through a gas tax or something else, and gas tax makes sense to me when you look at North Carolina, or you toll, which you pay 2-3x. Plus, it screws people that are lower income on the scale, or you just don't have them. So I'm with you on that. I got to get to a caller. Let's go to Chief Joe in Williamsburg. Chief Joe, you're on the air.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Chief.
Question for you, sir. And I know I may be jousting at windmills, but I'm just poking around and seeing what some of the political figures in our Commonwealth, what their sense of things are. In your opinion, sir, I hear about Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, but as a constitutional scholar who remains on active duty, I sit there and I scour Article 1, Section 8 of the federal Constitution, looking for the nominative authority for the federal government to impose these programs on us, and I find the Constitution lacking. I just want to see what your opinion of it is. I know politically the people of this country would not tolerate their removal, but I just want to know your personal feeling on the fact that they exist extra constitutionally.
Well, I can go through a lot of things the federal government does that isn't written in the Constitution. I can't find a thing about where the federal government has anything to do with education, yet we have a federal Department of Education. For the life of me, what they know about what's going on in your schools in Williamsburg, or my schools in Virginia Beach, or the schools in Danville, Virginia, they can't possibly have a clue of what's going on or what the needs are. And there's absolutely no reason in my mind for a federal Department of Education. They create a lot of paperwork. They hire a lot of people. We have to hire a lot of people in the State Department of Education to answer their paperwork from the Federal Department of Education, and hence government grows. when you talk healthcare, we're getting to a very sensitive subject, and you're right. There's absolutely nothing in there that provides for that. However, having said that, they put into place Medicare and provided a payroll tax for the Medicare, and both the employers and the employees pay into that. Looking for the outterm of because when you cease work and start retiring, you're going to need health care, and we think the federal government can do that for you under Medicare for the elderly. Right, wrong, or indifference, the system that we're in right now, and one that has been very, very expensive, and the projections are with the baby boom generation aging, that the demand on the system will certainly exceed the amount of money being deposited into the program, and it's going to run into some severe financial problems without some kind of addressing. So, these are difficult problems. And then you have, like I said earlier, the Medicaid program, again put on us, that's eating up the state budget. We have an opportunity in Washington, and so much of what we do here, Chief, is driven by our folks in Washington, D.C. If they just get out of it and let us do it the Virginia way, I believe that we can deliver the program and save the taxpayers a lot of money. And I'm hopeful that that's what they do in Washington.
That's going to be the final word. We want to thank State Senator Frank Wagner, candidate for governor, for being with us today. Hey, you want more information? Here's what you do. Wagner, VAGovernor.com, Wagner, VAGovernor.com. I want to thank Frank Wagner for being with us.